My name is Jake Gaddis. I am a CVCC nursing instructor, and I've also been an ICU nurse for 4 years. So my personal point of view of COVID since the pandemic has started, from an ICU nurse standpoint, I have seen the patients at their worst. So the patients that have been totally ravaged by the virus and are at the point where their body is no longer able to defend itself and their body is starting to fail. So I have seen people end up on dialysis because their kidneys no longer work because of the virus, end up on the breathing machine because their lungs have been so damaged from the virus and the effects that it causes, they can no longer breathe on their own. And I have, seen people die from this virus, and sadly more times than not. I guess the ones that stand out the most would be the really young ones, because a lot of people think, oh, I'm young, this can't affect me. That's not true. I've had patients younger than me, and I'm only 27 years old, that have ended up on the ventilator and ended up dying from the virus because their body just couldn't fight it off anymore. And these patients were both unvaccinated. One was 25,
Wow.
and one was in her early 30s.
How long were they in the hospital for?
They were both in the hospital for about a week before they came to the ICU, and once they made it to the ICU, they were there for almost a month before they both ended up dying. They are alone because their family cannot come visit them. A lot of times they are on heavy doses of sedatives to keep them compliant with the ventilator, because when you have something in your throat, your natural instinct is to cough and try to get it out. We want to prevent that because they need it for a reason. So we have them heavily sedated, and a lot of times their lungs are so damaged from the virus that we have to paralyze them with chemical drugs that run through an intravenous line that chemically paralyze them so they can be compliant with the ventilator, because that tube is so annoying, and the ventilator, you have to be synchronous with it. So the patient's body has to move in sync with the ventilator breaths. So these patients are alone. They're heavily sedated. They have catheters that drain their bladders. They have tubes down their throat to help them breathe. They have tubes in their rectum to drain stool. And they're loaded down with IVs, and they're getting meds around the clock, and they're getting all these high doses of antiviral meds that wreak havoc on your body. A lot of times they end up on antibiotics from secondary infections related to all of these tubes in their body. Those wreak havoc on your body. So they're essentially alone. When they come to me, they're at the lowest of lows. They're on the verge of dying.
Okay.
When they leave, they're either leaving after they've already passed, or they have gotten a little bit better to the point where we can get them off the ventilator and get them back out of the ICU to free up that bed for someone else. When they leave the ICU, they either go back to the med-surg floor, or they go to a long-term care facility, like an LTAC. And when they go to LTAC, typically they're still on the ventilator. They're trached, they have a feeding tube surgically implanted in their stomach. The COVID patients, from the time they're admitted to the time they leave the facility and go wherever else they go, I would say that they're there for, the ones that come to the ICU are probably there for close to a month, if not longer, depending on the patient. We've had patients there for 7-8 weeks before they left the facility. The patients we see in the ICU are typically unvaccinated. I mean, there's only a handful of patients that we've had since the vaccines were available to the public that have come into the ICU. I mean, so the numbers are staggering. I mean, I would say 90% are unvaccinated, if not more. Typically, we see patients that have uncontrolled high blood pressure, uncontrolled diabetes, and they're typically overweight. That being said, I have had patients come in that were perfectly healthy otherwise, that ended up in the ICU on the ventilator. So with the COVID vaccine, the symptoms are very similar to the flu, very similar to strep and common cold, depending on how it affects you. From my experience as a nurse, comparing it to the symptoms of patients with COVID, the side effects of the vaccine are way better than having the illness itself, because the vaccine is safe. It's your body's natural response building that immunity. Part of building immunity is your body defending against what we're building the immunity to. So that's why we run fevers. That's why we get, minor aches and pains. That's why we may have a little bit of the chills. Those are normal, expected side effects from a vaccine. And they last a few days at most. Get vaccinated. Absolutely get vaccinated.